expect. Yes. Yeah. So now moving to our typical farm data. Just maybe one more remark about our methodology. Because we don't get institutional funding, both centrally and also the different partners, so far we only have a very few number of farms because it's very costly to establish and manage those farms. And so we don't have a huge number of typical farms. And the second remark I would like to make, I just picked a few examples to illustrate some principles for you, so that keep in mind that we have, for instance, the European Union or Canada or Australia or US are very big countries with very diverse environmental conditions. So I just picked a few examples to illustrate how in principle the production is organized, right? So now keep that in mind that these are case studies rather than something for the entire country. So that is the starting slide for this part of the presentation. Just to help you understand, this is the name of the typical farm. The first two letters stand for the country where the farm is located, so that is Australia. The number is the size of the farm in hectare, so the total farm, not the wheat acreage. And the two-letter code at the end stands for the region in the country. So we don't say this farm is typical for Australia, we rather say this is typical for Western wheat belt, right? Western Australia. This is a Canadian farm in Saskatchewan. This is from my home country, Germany, in Hildesheim, which is in the former western part of the country. This is in Russia, in the Kursk region, which is part of the next soil region, which you may have heard about. And this is US in North Dakota, close to the Canadian border. And what you see here is the average yield for the 2016-2018 period of those typical farms, just to give you an idea how different these farms are when just looking at the yield. So the Australian farm is only 2 tons, while the German one is 8.5. I should say that this is the farmer from that region would be disappointed. That's because we have like 2 poor yields. People usually shoot for something like 10 tons to the hectare. We then have Russia somewhat in the middle. This is, you should keep in mind, this is a farm which belongs to, you may have heard of Agro Holding. So it's a quasi-industrial organization which usually often is integrated into a big industrial operation. So they also produce then wheat, they also produce livestock very often. This is definitely above the national average. So don't confuse that with the national average, because there are still quite a number of very poor developed farms from the former Soviet Union. But unfortunately, those farms are neither willing nor able to share with us data. So we only have data for like the top end of the spectrum of farms in Russia. Yeah? And if you see those differences, you start wondering, don't they know their business? Well, what's going wrong with the Australians? And that is the answer to that question. These are rough figures of precipitation that those typical farms enjoy. And you see these enormous difference between Australia, 350 mils in that range, and up to 750 Germany. Of course, temperature is another factor that influences the values, so keep in mind Australia can be damn hot during winter growing season. So it's a mixture, but precipitation is the key driver of differences among those. That's all right. Yeah. In fact, I think we don't have, we may have one US farm which is irrigating wheat, but in South Africa, sorry. South Africa also has some irrigation wheat, but otherwise it's boring. Usually, in our current typical farms, irrigation is used for more high value products rather than
Do they have similar environments? And so the practices, are they different?
of course they are. I will talk about the practices. I will talk about that in a minute. No, they don't have the same environment. They have significant differences in soil conditions. They have significant differences in temperature. I just took the example precipitation because it's a very easy to understand indicator, and it's probably the most important one. Because these systems which I present to you are very developed and sophisticated. And I would, for instance, take the example of Germany. I would argue that the soil quality is only of very, very limited relevance anymore because of the very sophisticated system. What really matters is precipitation. So we have a number of farms which are located on very poor soils, like sandy soils, but they get more than 750 milliliters. They can easily produce 9 tons of wheat, no problem. But of course, in principle, the other factors also matter. But precipitation, my understanding, is really decisive. Yeah, and that is, I hope you can read it in the back as well, that is what we call a production system. The idea is to illustrate what kind of operations take place on a typical wheat producing farm. This is another German farm. The one in Hildesheim will look very similar. The logic is like this. So this is the months of the year. The green star indicates the seeding date. So wheat would usually be seeded at the end of September and harvested at the end of July next year. So the crop cycle is about 10 months in German wheat production. And these dots here indicate fertilization. So there is some fertilization before seeding, and then 4 nitrogen applications throughout the production cycle. And the key idea is to feed the plant, so to speak, into the mouth and to reduce losses. But keep in mind, they are shooting for 10 tons of wheat, right? And then we have the number of crop care applications, so such as herbicide. These are, we can read it, green dots are herbicides. And then we have insecticides here, and we have a number of fungicides here to protect the plant against fungus infections. I think I don't want to spend too much time just to illustrate how complex and how sophisticated the production system is. So that is one extreme, I would say, and the other one is the one from Australia. So, first of all, the production cycle, this is Canada, sorry. The production cycle is just 3.5 months. So they have very long winter. As we talk now, they already have the first snow, and they only start seeding end of April. Then they do some fertilization together with seeding. So no extra pass as in the German example. Then they have 2 crop care applications and harvest the whole stuff in August. That's that. But of course, we can expect 2.5 tons or something like that from such a system. But you need to keep in mind the low precipitation. Yeah, so now what does that mean in terms of cost of production? Because that is what we are all shooting for. What we here have is what we call direct cost or crop establishment cost. I hope you can read it. It's seed, nitrogen, phosphate, potash, herbicide, fungicide, and insecticide. And I think the first and obvious impression you have here is the German system is very expensive as far as crop care is concerned, whereas the Russian system, even though it uses all the 3 types of products, is relatively cheap, and all the others are in that range. What I brought here, I hope that answers your question. This is the amount of nitrogen that those systems that are applied. So for instance, this Australian farm only applies 30 kgs of nitrogen. The Canadian spends roughly 90, the German 200 kgs, the Russian 100, and the US 145. So that gives you an idea about the variability of input usage. What is important to note is that, of course, also we have significant differences in cost for individual items. I took one example here, for instance, the Russian farm only has to pay $0.6 per kg of nitrogen, whereas all the others are 0.8 and above. That is primarily because Russia is a very big producer of nitrogen, so therefore they have access to cheap nitrogen, whereas other producers often have to import that or have higher cost for energy. Energy is 90% of the cost to produce nitrogen. The other key indicator, which I also wanted to share with you here, is the amount of seed that's being applied. So the Australian is, again, at the very low end, at only 50 kgs of seed. And here we have the strange situation that the Russian system is very, very high. To my understanding, that is not an agronomic necessity, but that is tradition. Russia farmers used to seed very, very high amounts of seed. So I think that is something which has also to do with, historically, with poor technology. Because if you can't make sure that you have a very even placing of the seed, you need to have more seeds in order to have a decent crop stand. So therefore, they're traditionally apply a lot of seed, which is in principle not necessary. But even also the Australia, the US farms seed less because of
Yeah, from South African seeds, Germany spends a lot of cost. To get high yield, like 1.5 ton. Yeah, what was the economics? Which country is the most?
I will come to that in my next slide. Very good question. That is now the perspective on a per ton basis. So I divided, the previous slide was how much do they spend per hectare. And now I divided everything by the yield. And what you can see here it is damn efficient, even though they spend a hell of money per hectare, but because of the high yield they generate, the cost efficiency on a per ton basis is very good as far as inputs are concerned. The farm which is less efficient in input usage is the US farm and the Canadian and the Australian one. This is a very typical picture, and my hypothesis, that is not very scientific, but my hypothesis is that it comes because irrespective whether you have 2 tons or 10 tons, you need to establish the crop. So you have some kind of fixed cost to create a crop, and that is my explanation why the crop establishment costs tend to be slightly higher for low yielding countries as compared to high yielding countries. But that's just a hypothesis, so I will argue to
Is labor incorporated in this cost?
No, this is just direct cost. I come to the operating cost in a moment. That can change the picture. Yeah.
The variation in prices of inputs,
Yeah.
has not been taken into account here.
Of course, yes.
We have not standardized them across
No.
countries.
Which, since there are systematic differences between countries, I think it wouldn't help a lot to assume homogeneous prices, because they are not homogeneous. I mean, I took the example of nitrogen. I could use the other example of crop care products, so fungicides and insecticides and herbicides. For instance, in Russia, they have access to so-called gray imports from China, which are massively cheaper than what European producers can purchase. They simply don't have access. Therefore, I think, at least from my standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to take local actual prices rather than homogeneous prices. Because in the end, I mean, from a scientific standpoint and from a performance standpoint, your point is valid. But we want to inform decision makers, and decision makers need to consider the real world prices rather than theoretical. Yeah. So, and now we come to what we call operating costs. Maybe a few words to explain. We have hired labor, we have family labor, I say a few words on that, then we have contractor, which usually is the service of machine, fuel, and labor. So you ask someone to come in and do plumbing or do harvesting. And then when we have machinery and we have diesel. And machinery cost we calculate by calculating depreciation cost and finance cost. And repair, sorry. Just one word on family labor. If you're into economics, you may ask, how do you know figure for family labor, an economic figure, because they are not paid, which is true. However, since the bulk of farms globally are predominantly employing family labor, we need to find a way to account for that cost, because it's, even though there is no cash paid to each and every family labor, in the long run, the people doing the actual work need to make a living, and therefore we calculate what we call opportunity cost. That means if the farmer in this family would decide to quit farming, what could he or she earn outside? Be it in agriculture, or be it also outside agriculture, maybe at a consultancy or at a cooperative selling inputs or whatever is the relevant alternative. And again, that leads, of course, to massive differences between the countries and also the farm structures. So if you consider, let's say, a smallholder in Ethiopia who has relatively poor education, then of course his opportunity costs are much lower as compared to, let's say, a German farmer who has even a PhD and could work as a teacher somewhere or as a professor.
Why don't you multiply with the higher level cost?
Sorry?
Instead of calculating a foregone cost, what you have the higher labor cost.
And we have also higher labor, we have both.
You know the cost of the higher labor.
Good question. The problem is that especially in the developed world, the income expectation of a family farmer, the manager, is higher than what he would pay to a tractor driver. Or someone who's doing physical work.
So the assumption is, if I forgo that I have the higher labor cost, but if I forgo it, I have the opportunity of extra income. Is that the assumption?
No, the other, it's just the other way around. If I'm the farm manager, and I ask myself, should I continue working at the farm or should I go elsewhere? And I forgot all the sentiment and emotion, I just look at the economics. In the long run, I will only keep doing farm work if I earn at least as much as I could earn elsewhere. That's the logic behind it. And of course, it's important to know that this is not a cash cost to the farm. That means it also creates a lot of flexibility because you can forego or say, okay, this year was a bad year, I accept the lower income, no problem. But of course, in the long run, I will only stay in business if I have something similar to what I can earn. So that's the rationale of this approach. So,
Yeah. Well, can we take the cost of high level and as opportunity of family level as 1-to-1? Because if one person manages his farm,
yes.
and also if he's hired as a manager elsewhere, can we assume that that very person gets the same value, the same cost? When he's working on his farm,
Yes.
and on another farm, because when I work on another farm, I have to start competitive.
Yeah.
I have to get employed. So I will go ahead than I do on my own. So in that case, can I assume that in such cases, the cost can be 1-to?
Yeah. If that is, the problem is in the most, at least in the most parts of the developed world, the industrialized world, this alternative does not exist. So if you're a farm manager, you don't go work on your neighbor's farm. You're completely occupied to manage your own farm.
I think, can we keep our patience?
No, I think I don't mind. It's much better to interact if you don't mind.
Some of the answers could come in, I think.
Yeah, if the answers come, I will let you know. Yeah, please.
Getting this opportunity cost.
Yeah.
Maybe in the developed country, farmers will specialize in some commodities. But here in Africa, maybe a better example in Kenya, when farmers are diversified in business.
Yeah.
So if the same family member may work here and there, the opportunity cost out. So the same family may occupy the different
Yes.
business.
So
In terms of the country.
manufacturing or services or something else.
Yeah, then you have to calculate the cost of specific commodity for wheat.
We wouldn't calculate for a particular crop. We would calculate, so if he or she works on the farm, he could earn, let's say, $5 an hour. Or something like that. That is the the way we calculate it. And I think in principle, the principle should apply, at least we do it in other African countries as well. So what could you earn elsewhere if you would not work in Europe?
Yeah.
No, as a farmer, yes, as a worker. That might be also industry. So mining, for instance, in some cases is an alternative in some Africa. Okay, so just to give you an idea how much labor is spent to produce 1 hectare of wheat. What I have to highlight here is this is not the time spent actually on the machine or in the field, but it also includes what we call overhead working time. So sitting in the office, going to meetings, negotiating with your traders, blah, blah, everything. What you can see here is that these guys here are very, very lean organized. They only spend in total less than 3 hours per hectare to run, but keep in mind the production system picture, which I showed you, they very often just do seeding, 1 or 2 crop care applications and harvesting, that's it. And when you ask me why is Russia so high, even though they have a relatively extensive system, the problem is low labor productivity. Just to give you an example, I have been watching farm operations in Russia where they had 4 people to do fertilizer application, which is done by 1 guy in Canada or Germany or in the US. 1 was sitting on the lorry to load the seeder, the spreader. 1 was sitting on the tractor to actually do the work. 2 other guys were running around to show the tractor driver where he needs to drive to evenly spread the product. And the other factor which leads to this very high value is they have an enormous bureaucracy. They need to report to the government each and every detail, and also they have, because of their size, keep in mind those agro holdings sometimes have 20, 30,000 hectares of land to operate. They have a lot of people sitting in offices, filling in all forms and running statistics. And third factor, theft is a very big issue in Russia. So each and every machine needs to have, during the night, needs to have a guard protecting against theft, both of machinery and fuel. In some cases, they even guard livestock because they are afraid of people taking it.
What about tea? The tea get is high for you.
Yes.
In Russia.
Yeah. The problem with this farm is twofold, or it's just one key issue. It's a bad for German standards or EU standards. It's a rather small farm. It just has 120 hectares. So that means a lot of the labor force, it's predominantly family, and the year, there's not enough work to be done throughout the year. This is the key driver for this very high value. The actual work spent on the field may be in the range of 10 hours, 8 to 10 hours. So all the rest is overhead and and the other factor, these guys here, they hire a lot of people just seasonally for seeding and for harvesting. So that means they have no or very little winter time or any other off time where they need to pay them and don't have productive work. That is the key success factor for those farms. Yes, please.
Now, in continents like Africa, the climatic conditions not very good. Then how do we set the economic optimum in terms of income?
First of all, I mean, if you
The input level that we consider optimum this season might not repeat the next year and so on.
yeah,
Then even in terms of potential,
yeah.
how do we help mind?
I guess if I would bring some of our colleagues from Canada, from Australia, from the US, they would say that's exactly the same for us.
ከአንዱ አንደኛው አንደኛው
And of course, I don't know details about your climatic conditions, but I would guess it's not that different. So they also experience drought, they experience flooding, so, yeah. I mean, take the extreme Australia.
ቺ ወደዛ ትገኛለች ስዋፕ
Very rarely dry seasons where they basically don't harvest anything. So I think it's not that particular sort of thing that yeah. And I actually highlight I'm not a crop production nutritionist or whatever, so I can't give you advice. Your question. Please.
I can see large share of family labor.
Yes. Yes.
What does that?
እዚች ጋር ትገባና እዚች ጋር
ፓርቲስፔንቶች ግን አይታዩም እንደዛ ስታረግ
ፉል ስታደርገው አይታይም እዚች ጋር ገብተህ
What lesson
እዚች ጋር ያንተዋን ሚውት አድርገው
Maybe I would even step further. If you look at this one, you basically
ከዛ ከተሰማ በቂ ነው
basically no hired labor. This has very little. So the key message from that slide is chemical labor is the basis of farming in the industrialized world, except for they are 99% based on hired labor. Everybody else is predominantly based on chemical. So just take this example of this farm here. This is a 4,000 hectare farm. That's one family with part-time people coming in during season.
ሙስን ናቸው ሰዎች
It's a little bit here, let's say,
ትምህርት መንገዳችን
ትችላለህ
የነሱ
የነሱን
ነው ይሄ
ይሄ ይታያል ቺ ትታያለች ጆይን ኦዲዮ በምትለዋ ትገባና ሊቭ ማለት ነው ኦዲዮ ስትል ድምፁ ይጠፋል
That gives you an idea how these figures get been constructed. Yeah, so, and now again, looking at the per ton perspective of operating cost. So this very expensive German system, I mean, is still not the cheapest one, but it's still not way off, I would argue. And what is very obvious here is that the Russian system is very, very competitive as far as operating costs are concerned. And on the other hand, this Australian system, even though on a per hectare basis it was very, very small, given the very low yields, it becomes one of the more expensive in that comparison. Yeah, just a few remarks on prices. All our prices, we assume, are farm gate prices, which is important, especially when you look at farms like the Canadian one or the Russian one, which have up to 2,000 kilometers to travel to ship the grain to the next harbor, which is explicitly true for the Canadian. So all these farms have roughly $190 US. The Russian farm is much cheaper. Do you want to ask something, or is that? Sorry. Has much lower prices. That is a particularity in wheat. If I would have presented something on corn or on rapeseed, that wouldn't be the case. And to be very honest with you, I don't have a 100% convincing answer. I have some elements to that. One is the quality issue. As you may know, in wheat, quality plays a role in global markets. And my prejudice would be that Russian farms tend to have quality issues. So therefore they have to sell produce at a lower price to compete on world markets. And the other is the strong political will of all the actors in Russia to become a powerhouse in wheat. I don't know how they manage it, but somehow the wheat prices are very, very low for farms. So this is now the overall economic situation of these typical farms. But in the different categories. What we did here, we have the dark blue is cash cost. So what is actually spent for inputs, but also for fuel, for fertilizer, for labor, and for land. Then we have depreciation, of course, for machinery and for buildings, and we have our famous opportunity cost. In this case, also including land, because when the farmers own land, we have the same problem as with labor, that there is no actual payment, but still it has an economic value which we need to keep in mind. And therefore we apply the same approach to ask, if you would terminate farming, for how much could you rent out your land to your neighbor? And that is included here. And we also calculate capital that the family invests into the farm, applying the same approach. How much interest rate could you earn for your capital if you would put it not into your farm, but put it onto the bank, which is the default option which we use. And what you can see here is that the systems, except for the German farm, are about break even on a long-term total cost calculation. Keep that in mind. That does not mean that the German farm makes a loss. It just tells you in the long run they can't cover all opportunity costs. That is the key message here. And what you see here is that the Russian farm is very profitable. So they, over all total cost, they have a margin of about $250 per hectare profit. That is after all inputs, all labor, all capital, all land has been removed. And what I need to tell you here is the green to the right. That is what the market revenue is, the red dot. And the revenue, including decapital payment, that is the famous subsidies that German or European farmers receive. You can see here that is in the range of $300 per hectare. That is a government payment that they receive irrespective of what they do, whether they produce a crop or not. That's simply the flat rate per hectare. And you can see there is a very small direct payment for the US farmland, but it's without any economic relevance. So that, and you can see that it's pretty significant for the economic situation of European farms. And what I told you before about this calculation, should I stay in business or should I leave the business? This is a very valid question for such a farm, because I would argue that it's very hard under German conditions to run a farm of that size in a profitable manner. And I would assume we will see more and more farms of that size category go out of business, merge with other farms. That does not necessarily mean that they sell the farm, but they quit farming themselves. We see growing number of collaboration of farms where they combine the operations, share the profit, and have some kind of risk sharing as well. Yeah, and again, I did the calculation on a per ton basis. And what you can see here is that on a per ton basis, again, how competitive the Russian farm is. And what you can see here also is how important land costs. Sorry, I forgot to introduce you to the legend. So this is direct cost, so basically seed, fertilizer, crop care. This is operating cost, and this is land cost. What you can see is, if you forget about land cost, it's pretty similar in the range of $150 across the board. What differs really between the different sites, excluding Russia, is what do you mean by land cost? That is it's a mixed calculation of rent, what they actually pay, and their opportunity cost that they could earn if they would quit farming. Yeah? So,
does this mean that Germany's not making profits?
in the long run, yes. In the long run, this farm is not earning full remuneration for their own labor, for their own land, or for their own capital. Right? Keep in mind, that does not mean that they make losses. It's just that their land and their labor is not rewarded as they expect.
So it's high opportunity costs for
Yeah. But it's primarily land, I would argue. And this is also then the point where we need to keep in mind that farmers have a rotation. So it might very well be that this farm has very profitable business in rapeseed, in sugar beets, or in corn, and produces wheat as an element of the rotation, and is ready to accept a relatively poor result in wheat in order to be able to produce the other crops. So this is not the end of the story. This is just an aspect which we need to consider looking at the economic situation. Okay? Yeah, take-home messages. I think I can be rather quick. I think the key message is global wheat markets and global wheat production is very diverse, ranging from 2 tons in Australia to 10 tons in Germany or France or the UK. The global markets are dominated by low-yielding countries, not by countries like such as Germany or France. I think with proper technology and farm structure, low yields are not an economic disadvantage. Rather, I would argue they can be very successful and very competitive. On the other hand, the high intensity of input usage can be very efficient. If you remember the example of the German farm, you would find similar situations for Britain or France. And I think it's a fair statement to say that Russia, if you consider this very competitive situation, is a rising star. And I would argue that they will probably keep growing their export shares and their role as a leading global wheat exporter, as they already are. Yeah, that was my story of wheat so far. Thank you very much for your interest and for all your questions. Good.
So I think next presentation. Yeah, can we give him a hand? Really, I think he has brought so many insights to global wheat production. He has really indicated what elements do we need to focus when we do, if we have to do our economics. I think productivity is one element. Cost is very important. The cost structure is very important. Not going to repeat what you have said. Really a lot of things. Now it's open for discussion. Yes. There's a very much.
Yeah. Well, on your presentations,
I'm a reader, so
I'm
my
a reader.
Okay.
We have seen certain amount of subsidies here and there in well-to-do countries. But in countries like ours, the government cannot provide subsidy because of capacity, economic capacity.
Yeah.
And then, how can we compete with like the developed countries on the market and subscribe? And maybe the other point is those countries are talking about free market, but still they subscribe their funds. There is some contradiction within the courts.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, I'm not defending the European or German policy. So that is definitely a contradiction. However, you need to keep in mind what I showed you about land cost. Because in the end, all the subsidies end up at the landlords. Right? Because we have very competitive land market, so that means that farmers use the money that they get from the government to pay higher land rents that they would pay otherwise. So therefore, whether we would have a dramatically different production in Germany or in Europe without subsidies, I would question. I mean, of course, it makes life easier for growers. They have more liquidity in the system, but my key concern is in the end, a lot of the money goes to the landlords. And since, I mean, of course, most of the farmers in Germany or Europe are also landowners, so part of that goes to their own pocket, but increasingly they rent inland from neighbors, because that's the way they grow. I mean, they extend their operations not primarily by purchasing land, but primarily by renting inland. Okay, so therefore, I don't think we would have at least, let's talk about Germany. I don't think we would have a dramatically different way of production, performance of production without subsidy. We would have a consolidation of farm because a number of guys would simply quit and say, under those terms, I'm no longer interested in farming. But I don't think we would have major differences in production.
How about this opportunity cost of labor?
Yeah.
In relation to subsidies? I mean, if the opportunity cost of labor is high,
Yeah.
then if the government is not subsidizing, then people may intend to quit farming because they have to go and work somewhere else.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
That's what
That farmers may not have opportunities to work in other sectors in our case because of limited labor markets.
Yeah, that's an issue. I mean, especially, I guess, also in countries like Ethiopia. But in industrialized countries, usually that is not an issue.
Yeah, that's not an issue.
And we have a structural change of about, I think, at least 2.5% per year. Farmers decide to quit farming and to do something else.
Okay. Then what will be the long-term consequence of this, structure of this cost structure? You see it across these countries.
I think in Europe we will see an ongoing increase in farm size. Because we have in France, in the UK, in the western part of Germany, Spain, Italy, we have predominantly, from a global perspective, relatively small farms, so something in the range between 50 and 100 hectares. So there will be this ongoing structural change. I'm not so sure about structural change in countries like Australia and Canada, because the economies of scale are becoming very, very small. So once you have a combine that does, let's say, 800 hectares, adding another combine to that around 1,600 hectares does not create a significant economies of scale. I mean, you have some savings in grain. So if you hire, or if you're well educated, you can easily manage 1,600 hectares, not only 800. So that cost is then wider distributed over more hectares. You have some savings in input purchase and some extra revenues in better marketing, but that is very, very thin.
Thank you for the nice presentation. I have a question. The differences of the weak systems protest.
Yeah.
Some of the countries need Deutschland, almost 1 year
It assumes one. In countries like Canada, although they have also the wheat, and they actually produce wheat and wheat as well, but in the analysis came to spring wheat. So based on the results, does that really mean countries need to, Australia has no option of going with the license that are quite strong. But for countries like USA and Canada, having the results shown us not very well paying picture, wheat as they going now, does that really imply they may need to consider the other system as well, like we don't like not only spring beans, but also winter.
This is a very good question.
question, and we see.
Yeah, this is a very good question. I mean, there are some spots in Canada where they can produce locally, but for the bulk of area, it's not possible because it's too cold or too long covered by snow. So that is not, for the most part, it's not an option. Where I see an expansion in winter wheat is in Russia and Ukraine. Then we have still bigger portions of land that produce spring wheat, but they could move to winter wheat. And I think that's also the process that takes place as seeding becomes more accurate, the whole operation to prove that might become the way forward. But you still need to keep in mind that the overall vegetation period is still shorter than Germany. Right? You have longer winter break, even though it might not be as harsh as in Canada. So that's definitely part of the development.
The implication is the yield. Winter wheat is my I use as a streaming, I have not sure, but that is what my.
Yeah, but you can't, when you cannot,
Sorry, when we study that with our condition in the pro activity is not high. Of course, nitrogen is low, so low inputs to use, but even with high inputs, the productivity won't be as high. Does that have anything to do with the profitability of the
I would argue that I need to be careful because, as I said, I'm an economist. But my experience tells me, as I said, precipitation is driving. If you would have 1,000 millimeters or something like that a year, or more evenly distributed, like in Brazil or in Australia, you could produce 10 tons of wheat, no problem. But you don't have that, I guess, most places. Yeah? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was in Berlin, that's common, with growing areas.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe apart from the rainfall part.
Distribution is an issue. We have increasing issues in Russia with heat during flowering.
Heat is in the lowland,